Welcome to the Tea Time Podcast. I'm Ricardo, and today we are going to recap the war that we all just went through. And although we've all felt pain in one shape or another, our allies ultimately triumphed.
Hello, my name is Markeisha. Today we are going to talk about the war. We will be focusing on Great Britain. We are in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. It marked a period of development in the later half of the 18th century that transformed largely rural, agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. Some of the goods are still being painstakingly crafted by hand, but slowly are starting to be produced in mass quantities by machines in factories, thanks to the introduction of new machines and techniques in textiles, iron making, and other industries. The Great War introduced many advances in science and technology into modern warfare. These advances changed the nature of warfare, including battle strategies and tactics. Scientists and inventors on both sides worked throughout the war to improve weapon technology in order to give their side an edge. The Great War was the first war where the airplane was used. Initially, airplanes were used to observe enemy troops. However, by the end of the war, they were used to drop bombs on troops in cities. They also had mounted machine guns that were used to shoot down other planes. On December 7, 1914, Pope Benedict XV suggested a temporary hiatus of the war for the celebration of Christmas. The warring countries refused to create any official ceasefire, but on Christmas, the soldiers in the trenches declared their own unofficial truce. Starting on Christmas Eve, many German and British troops fighting in Great War sang Christmas carols to each other across the lines. And at certain points, the Allied soldiers even heard brass bands joining the Germans in their joyous singings. At the first light of dawn on Christmas Day, some German soldiers emerged from their trenches and approached the Allied lines across no man's land, calling out Merry Christmas in their enemies' native tongues. At first, the Allied soldiers feared it was a trick, but seeing the Germans unarmed, they climbed out of their trenches and shook hands with the enemy soldiers. The men exchanged presents of cigarettes and plum puddings and sang carols and songs. Some Germans lit Christmas trees around their trenches, and there was even a documented case of soldiers from opposing sides playing a good-natured game of soccer.
Now we are going to speak about major battles recently. First, on April 22nd, the Second Battle of Ypres, our enemies, Germany, used poison gas for the first time. Also, Canada proved himself as courageous in this battle. When Germany used poison gas on our Canadian troops, the Canadians continued to fight although they were suffocated. Canada was then praised for their persistence and achieved the reputation of being courageous.
Another major battle we experienced was the Battle of Somme, our bloodiest battle of the Great War. We fought along the French against the German. The Battle of Somme took place in France in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. This battle started on July 1st, 1916. The British and French had lost approximately 620,000 lives, and the Germans lost around 500,000 soldiers, totaling almost 1.5 million deaths. The Battle of the Marne marked the end of mobile warfare of the Western Front. Following their retreat, the Germans re-engaged Allied forces on the Aisne, where fighting began to stagnate into trench warfare. The opening months of the war caused profound shock due to the huge casualties caused by modern weapons. Losses on all fronts for the year 1914 topped 5 million, with 1 million men killed. This was a scale of violence unknown in any previous war. The terrible casualties sustained in open warfare meant that soldiers on all fronts had begun to protect themselves by digging trenches, which would dominate the Western Front until 1918.
Jobs in the civil service, factories, docklands, arsenals, tramways, post office, and farms were finished. In July 1914, 3.2 million women were employed in the industry. This had jumped to 4.8 million by April 1918. Some of the 40% of these women were married, compared with only 14% prior to the war. During the Great War, Britain incurred debts equivalent to 136% of its gross national product, and its major creditor, the U.S., began to emerge as the world's strongest economy.
Fear, grief, sorrow. These are the overriding emotions of war. For men, women, and children confided to the home front between 1914 and 1918, exhilarating surges of patriotic energies and the evaporation of many restraints were fleeting thrills when set against the loss of loved ones. Britain was burned with huge external deaths. The war had led to an economic boom, to a large increase in demand, production, prices, and employment. When the war boom ended, production contracted, employment and unemployment increased.
Long, narrow trenches dug into the ground at the front, usually by infantry soldiers who would occupy them for weeks at a time, were designed to protect troops from the machine fire and artillery attack from the air. In the wake of the Battle of Marne, during which Allied troops halted the steady German push through Belgium and France that had proceeded over the first month of the Great War, a conflict both sides had expected to be short and decisive turns longer and bloodier as Allied and German forces began digging the first trenches on the Western Front on September 15, 1914. The trench system on the Western Front in World War I, fixed from the winter of 1914 to the spring of 1918, eventually stretched from the North Sea coast of Belgium southward towards France, with a bulge outwards to contain the most contested Ypres salient. Running in front of such French towns as Soignes, Reims, Verdun, Saint-Mihiel, and Nancy, the systems finally reached its southernmost point in Alzey. At the Swiss border, in total, the trenches built during the Great War led to end would stretch some 35,000, 12,000 of those miles occupied by the Allies and the rest by Central Powers.